everybody. Oh, I might need to take my glasses off so I can see anybody. Before we kick in, keen to get a bit of audience participation and curious to know why you're here for this session. So if there's fellas in the room that were too scared not to be, if you're game enough to raise your hand. Anybody comfortable and just couldn't be bothered leaving? Still trying to understand what the quantum session was about? What else have we got? The sisterhood, you're here to support the sisterhood? Thanks team. Hoping I might talk about my guinea pigs or Libyan goats or some other random tangent that's not at all useful. Great. Well, we're going to kick in then. There's a whole lot of conversations that we want to have. We have 40 minutes to do that. Ollie has introduced the fabulous panel, but I want to ask everybody to start with, and Sally Ann, I'm actually going to start at your end if I can. We heard this morning from Lee Sales around, having real purpose around what we're doing and the stories that we want to tell. So I actually want to start with a question around what are you hoping that people will know or understand more as a result of the conversation we're going to have?
Look, I think the number one thing that I want everybody to walk out of here today to know and to talk about, most importantly, to talk about to everybody, is the fact that women have always been a part of the system. They have always been in agriculture. They have always been leaders. They have always been contributors. They have just been written out of history, or actually they were never written in history to remove from it in the first place. And so there's a little bit of myth busting, which we'll get into today, I think. But, for example, women are massive contributors across all of the STEM fields and always have been. And you only have to look to what happened in World War II when we sent all the men away to war because women weren't allowed to fight. Whether we wanted to or not is another story. But, we actually ran the farms, we ran the factories, we did all the maintenance, we did the mechanics, we ran the banks, we ran the financial systems. We did all of those things, but it's not recognised. We were the first programmers. The fact that we got men onto the moon was because women programmed that thing. So women have always been participating. They have been participating in, both Western and First Nations and Indigenous knowledge systems and carriers of that knowledge and leaders for millennia. And we need to start recognising that and talking about it and really dismantling some of the structural barriers, I think, that have been put in the way that have maybe stopped the conversation and stopped that highlight and shining that sort of visibility on the role and the contributions we've made in society.
Thank you. Lisa, what about for you? What do you want people to know?
For me, I think following on from what you said, it's really important to me today, I guess, we've got some really interesting and amazing women on this panel, and I think they're really brave. They're going to sit here and they're going to tell their stories, and I think today is about really taking a step back and being kind and giving everyone the opportunity in the room to hear those stories. I always say, I love cricket, I love Test cricket, I've been to a lot of matches, but I've never been an Australian cricketer, and so I'd love to hear from an Australian cricketer. Let's hear from the women who've been on the field, and it's not about men or women. These are the real stories, and how do we actually work forward together.
Awesome. Kylie, what about for you?
All right, so I work in venture capital, and what I see in that arena is that women don't get second chances, and I can demonstrate that with data. And what I suspect is that that's the case in many other arenas too, not just venture capital, but that's where I work. So let me paint that picture for you with some data. We know that women receive a fraction of the funding that men do, yet they're expected to achieve the same milestones. This year, at the early stages, the average size of a funding round for a woman-led company was $1 million. An all-male company got 3.4. A team of mixed gender team received 1.4 from memory, might be 1.3. Regardless of the amount that they've raised, the venture capital system demands that they reach the same milestones at around the same time. And you can see that we're effectively giving women these concrete boots and asking them to get to the summit at the same rate. It's a myth that at the Series A, you are rewarded only if you have perfect execution. I can tell you, no one has perfect execution. And that's subjective judgment as to what is good enough. From where I sit, it's usually the men who are getting that second chance. At the deal count in early stage funding, women do okay at the early stages. We're up there in about 45% of all deals. By the time we get to Series A, that's dropped down to 19%. And I think that's because women just aren't getting enough second chances.
You can probably tell already there's a lot of conversations we're going to have. But Jossie, I want to come to you. What's something you're hoping people will learn, take away from this conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Jules. We get so much opportunity at Swarm Farm to pitch our company, domestically and internationally. And something I get asked a lot is, oh my goodness, husband-wife team, that's strange. And no, it's not in agriculture. Nearly 50% of our customers are females. But they're not visible. They're at home or they're in the office. They're the ones cooking the books where the boys are spending the money. So it's a partnership, and we need to remember that women have been in agriculture. We're half of that. And I'd actually like to point out that women weren't actually allowed to become or put down their trade as farmers until 1994.
Yeah.
So that is a fun fact.
Yep, we're going to come back to that fun fact, 1994. Some of us were just finishing school, some of us were already in the workforce at that stage. But let's come back to some of the myths that we want to bust. There was something on the news the other day. The Queensland Trucking Association was talking about the floods and the devastating floods that we have had in North Queensland in recent weeks. And they were talking about the rebuild of the roads and about how we need to start thinking about building infrastructure actually for the trucks that are driving on it that we let the cars on, rather than building roads for the cars and then getting annoyed that the trucks are driving on them and wrecking them quickly. And I thought that was a really good analogy around some of the conversations we've had in the lead up to this panel. And so Jossie, I want to start with you again. You talk a lot about the culture of your business. You always introduce yourself and you're always introduced as the co-founder, and I think that's fantastic. But can you talk more around the culture that you're creating at Swarm Farm and what that's looking like in terms of this inclusive workforce that people want to be part of?
Yeah, thanks, Jules. I think it's really important. We are a partnership, Andrew and I, in the way we run our business. And look, he's the visionary, I'm the detail. I love to hide in the background and don't like the public speaking, but culture is a really big part of our business. So many years ago, we had a business coach, and he, really drove home the values and the inclusivity, and it's been really key to us. And I sprinkle women all through our business. We have software coders, we have hardware people, parts, logistics, finance and people, and just love that. They're always looking out for everyone. They're looking and thinking about the conversations that are being had, but also the ones that are not being had. So super proud.
Thank you. Sally Ann, have you got some research or data that might help back up the importance of having women across the STEM workforce?
Yeah, look, I'm just going to give you some examples and concrete examples because I love facts and figures. I'm a data nerd. I spent 13 years on the engineering team at Google before I do what I do now, and I've been doing it for 5.5 years, so I love data. However, I do think a good story paints a much more powerful picture. So let me paint a picture for you of what happens when we don't have diverse, inclusive teams in our workforce and how we actually all miss out, and some of the things that can go tragically wrong. Women and children died and were horrifically injured when we first introduced mandatory seatbelts and airbags. And the reason that they did was not because people wanted to kill women and children. I don't think anybody ever wants to do that. Maybe some bad people, but generally we don't want to do that. But they were designed by men and they were tested with an average male crash test dummy. So the parameters of which we were building and testing things were done with one output in mind. Never mind the fact that, women drive, women do school runs, women do all of these things. So we're talking about the 70s here and into the 80s. If we think about some of the other structural things that we've done around design and things we've only just fixed, it was 1984 with the Sex Discrimination Act in Australia that allowed women to get their first loan without a male guarantor. 1984. That means we were locked away from finance and we were locked away from independence Even if we were single and we were working and had our own means to buy property, we couldn't do that on our own. Somebody had to guarantee it. If we think about sidewalks, so I want to take it out of gender because you think, oh, this is just a gendered thing. Actually, the reason that we have ramps, the reason that we have cutaways in sidewalks and curbs is because for people with wheelchairs and people with mobility issues. But guess what? That makes it better for everybody that's going and hiring a scooter and going to the pub after this event on one of your little e-scooters around Brisbane, right? So when we think about diversity and inclusion, we actually have to go, not what are we trying to solve for, we're trying to solve for who's not around the table that needs to be, because the people that use our products and services, the people that will buy from us, the people that will work for us are more diverse. They're different to me, they're different to you. And so how do we bring them into the conversation and into the opportunity to make things that are better for everybody? I want to give one final example because I love a good kitchen appliance and a kitchen tool. You know those really expensive can openers and things like that? There's like, you can buy the cheap $2 one or you can buy that like $17, $18 one, and they always work and they make everything super easy, and from a grip perspective, they don't take any issue. They were designed by a husband and wife team that started their company, and the wife got chronic arthritis, an arthritic condition, and he said, I love to cook alongside of her and I love to be in the kitchen with her and I don't want her missing out. And those products have been made in such a way that there's more people with mobility issues now that are able to cook and live independent lives at home. So when we think about diversity and inclusion, we've got to think about it in every single context, that it makes the world better for us all, and we can make money from that because some of us up here like to make money too.
I think we all like to make money. I'll put that out there. Lisa, we grew up in regional areas and we grew up in the cattle industry. You've come from a family industry background and you're in a senior role now at Elders as manager across Queensland and Northern Territory. Ollie mentioned before some of his greatest supporters are women, some are men. You know, I'm keen for your thoughts and your experience in terms of, you know, what support you've had along the way, moving from that, you know, family industry business into now the work that you do at Elders.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I always say to people I'm very lucky, right? And we'll talk a little bit later probably about language and why that's really, really important. And I just want to pick up on what you touched on. I think my Queensland NT team in the room here today would have heard me say that over and over. Diversity is not about men, women, it's about diversity of thought. And we as humans, we just measure it through things like gender and race because we're not smart enough to do it any other way. So it's about bringing diversity of thought. And I think, coming back to your question, when I talk about being lucky, I grew up in a family. I have 3 older brothers, and I was expected by my parents and my brothers to do pretty much the exact same thing they could do every single day. And, people might say that's tough. I actually say it's luck, and I'm very, very thankful for that. And will continue to be thankful for that. They continue to push me. They are my number one supporters, but they continue to push me. And every time I go to them with a problem, they put the men's lens over it, and it's fantastic. So this is the diversity of thought that we're actually talking about. It's been such, for me, and continues to be such a source of strength and support for me, being able to bring both my brain and their brains together. The reality of it is I could have been very easily pigeonholed, right? And so I actually made a conscious decision to leave ag 10, 15 years ago. I made that conscious decision because I couldn't actually see at that point in time that ag had a future for me in what I wanted it to be. I could absolutely have got married and had kids. I could absolutely have, been, we're going to talk about language a bit later, Joss, been put in that pigeonhole, but I wanted to be able to contribute more to the industry that's been so good to me. So I made the conscious decision to exit it and come back in later once I'd gathered other experiences. And I think we probably, when we sit and reflect on that and the change that we've had in the last 10 years, it's a huge change. And, the other thing about exiting, I guess, going out and coming back in is the great men that have also supported me on that journey, and I can name them. They know who they are. I don't need to name them for everyone today, but I have literally stumbled over some of the greatest humans, both males and females, who have been significant contributors to my career, but namely the men who proudly stood beside me.
I couldn't agree more, right? I think, for me at the moment, it's talking about the regional diversity piece as well, and the fact that we are all sitting on this panel. There's not a lot of gender diversity here, team. There's a hell of a lot of regional diversity and life experience, and I think that's part of this conversation that we need to bring up. Kylie, you and I did some work a couple of years ago looking in that funding space and how we're making sure some of that is happening or where it's going. We often end up talking about childcare like it's the mother's issue. It's really a community issue. It's actually an economic development and an economic prosperity issue for families and therefore our regional communities. Some of the work that we were doing from a Queensland perspective showed that if female founders were funded at the same rate, there'd be $1 billion more in our Queensland economy. And I think it was about $44 billion nationally across Australia. I mean, that's some serious coin when we're talking targets of getting to $30 billion in agriculture and $100 billion at a federal level. So there is some serious economic reasons as to why we should be doing this, not just because we're, lovely women and deserve a crack. Can you talk a little bit about some of, you talked about it from a second chances perspective before, but I'm keen for you to talk a little more around, how that can help from a power position as well and where you're seeing some of those opportunities through the work that you're doing.
Sure. I mean, the nature of venture capital is to look for outsized returns, right? Like the hints in the name. I'm in it for the money. I'm not an impact investor. I am, a cutthroat, money-hungry bitch, and I am perfectly okay with that. What I believe is that some of our biggest economic problems, some of the biggest problems facing the world right now are also some of our biggest economic opportunities.
Absolutely.
Agriculture is obviously a huge one and why I'm here today. And investing more in women is part of that as well. There's a really interesting structural shift that I think we're coming up against that we haven't faced before. And I loved, I think it was Tim in the opening session who described himself as not a structural optimist. And I was like, that is a framing that I am taking and adopting because I am not normally a structural optimist. As a staunch feminist, years of history have taught me to be sceptical of structures of power that have tended not to work in my favour. But I think that's changing. And it's changing because as we become more reliant on machines, the need to over-index on physical strength is becoming less important. I have 2 siblings in the Special Forces. Christmas at my house can be a brutal affair, I tell you that. But my brother is transitioning out. He was your traditional grunt infantryman that progressed to the Special Forces. There is just not as much need for muscle at the elite level. My sister is an elite cyber operator. She is an absolute weapon behind a screen. That is the skill set that we need in the future. And as that qualification for brute strength to hold positions of power, as those structural changes actually happen, I think we're going to see something really beautiful happen. And as the venture capitalists in the room, looking for, where to make money in that, I'm pretty excited.
Can I just interject? There's one more structural change that's coming by 2034, and that's the intergenerational wealth transfer, which I haven't heard mentioned on any panel yet. And I think it's worth mentioning that in Australia, $5 trillion, 65% going to women. So that's going to be fueling the fire.
Can you say that statistic again?
Yeah, so by 2034, $5 trillion in Australia from boomers. It's the intergenerational wealth transfer, 65% of it going to women, and it's a similar trend globally. And so there is a conversation that's not often brought to this sort of conference. It's very much talked about in the financial services sector, that generational wealth transfer is going to women just because we happen to have a lot of women being born. So
That's very interesting because I often talk about my rural finance background, and I often think, it takes a long time for the farm to change hands money-wise, but that's what I love with ag tech. We actually get to bring the younger generation in, and also females, and actually have a meaningful, impact on the farm.
So I wanted to take the skill set conversation though to one of the ones that we were having earlier around, Jossie, the conversation we had around business and commerce is a better course or a better degree to do over something in the ag space. You know where I'm going
yes,
with this?
I do know where you're going with
happy
this.
to chat to that?
Yeah, our daughter just decided, it's starting university this year, and decided to take straight commerce, business and commerce over ag. And I was devastated because, we are clearly a very ag dominant family. And I think that's a very real challenge that we have in ag. Like, we actually really need to have it, set the bar higher. Like, we're thinking of it as a second-class citizen. So, yeah.
So in terms of being able to build that skill set, you talked before about, you've got women all through the business in a whole range of different areas. We've heard multiple times from a few different speakers around how do we get more people into agriculture. This STEM piece is still not sticking though, right? Like, there is still something around that's not working. Sally Ann, I'm looking at you and you're already...
I'm rolling my eyes a little bit. If only there was, a report or a dozen that had been presented to multiple governments with some recommendations of how to tackle this challenge from start to finish. Oh wait, there was in February last year. And we're still waiting for it. You can the sarcasm is just dripping off me today on that. But I led the diversity and STEM review for the federal government, and there's a couple of things in it. It isn't just the role of government to deal with this, but there's been a lot of people talking about visibility. If you can't be what you can't say, that's part of it. But can we talk about the role and responsibility that we all have in this? Because I think that's the conversation that's really important. So one is pathways in, and it's the role and responsibilities of teachers, our curriculum, our universities, our TAFEs, whatever other training sectors that we have, to make those pathways more visible and more attractive. And there's a whole bunch of really phenomenal work out there being done in this space. There's a bigger challenge which we need to address, and it is the elephant in the room that keeps getting danced around at a federal level and at a state level and in boardrooms and in the private sector with no concrete, really clear leadership, I believe, and that is around what are we doing around governance and controls of safety in our universities, in our training sectors, because we do not have the same obligations on our council members as what you hold as a director around bullying and sexual misconduct and psychosocial safety in the workplace. And so we have really poor behaviours that are entrenched, and we have people being investigated for misconduct, and we have people leaving. So we have an attrition at universities and in the education sector because of poor actors who are not moved on, who are not terminated. There's a whole litany of it. There's reports. There's review after review after review. It's decadal. But we also have this in our workplace, and this is from our smallest workplaces to our largest workplaces. And it's got to be moving beyond a tokenism of lip service to going, I care about inclusion, or I care about women, or I care about First Nations people or people with disabilities, and actually go, what do you mean by that? Are you rewarding and compensating behaviours and setting policies and practices in your organisations that support your notion of care to deliver on that promise? And the reality is we aren't. If we look at WGEA reporting data, it goes into it and it tells you every single company that doesn't have those policies. It tells you about the gender pay gap. It tells you where we are falling short, and yet we are not having conversations in our boardrooms and as company directors about what we're doing to actually stand up to the values and things that we care about. And the reason that I care so passionately about this and governance, I never thought I'd be the person that talks about governance and risk, is it's the risk of doing nothing means we leave behind and leave on the table the opportunity of greatness. And that is greatness in solving some of the wicked problems that we have in the world. It's financial greatness. It's in more inclusive society. It's thriving rural communities and regional communities where people have full participation. And by not doing these things and not taking action and committing to them, we are failing, and we are failing subsequent generations, whether they're the kids that we give birth to or whether they're your kids or the generations to come. We are failing to set them up for success by not holding ourselves accountable to do better. And it's got to start at the earliest stage, and that's why I love the intentionality of what you're building in your business about going, we are going to build differently and we are going to set the standard.
Yeah, it's something I'm very I am really passionate about telling the stories, and I think in ag we need to tell the stories. So getting kids and getting teachers the information pack so they can actually, tell what we're doing,
And again, this is factual. We have the statistics to back this up. This is factual. So this is not about making people feel uncomfortable. And at the same time, we have decades of facts and statistics. So maybe feel a bit uncomfortable.
Wishful thinking doesn't get you running the marathon, right? The hard work and the intentionality of getting out there every day and the training program does.
Yep.
It's exactly the same in this.
So I want to come back. To around. We kind of hear this story and we hear the myth and we heard the seatbelts and the airbags. I remember when I heard that story and I was shocked and couldn't believe it. And so Lisa, to come to you, you're working in a national business across a very strong industry. What does it look like in your industry? Are women underrepresented? What does it look like? How is that playing out for you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I was actually having this conversation outside with someone before. I don't believe it's a representation problem. I think in terms of actual, if I look at the business of elders in Queensland and Northern Territory, we have 48% of our workforce are women. So it's not about the numbers, it's not about the volume. It's about what our unconscious bias and what we're putting those women into the roles, in what roles those women are doing. So we have 48% women, and when we look at women in leadership, that number's a lot lower. So, and that's not necessarily as any one business's fault or any one person's fault. As you said, we're a young nation. First of all, we've only in the last 20 to 30 years really started changing legislation to help, I guess, the progression of equality. So it's great that we've actually got women there working. My job, or not my job, I guess my belief in what I want support in is to help those women, the representation, that equal representation we've got now, believe in themselves, that their job is not pigeonholed as the admin assistant or the typewriter. I see our women, and I'm so proud of them in the network, are delivering so well for our customers in unconventional roles. And it's not our men's fault either. It's that we're a young nation, we're on a young journey in this together, and we really need to work together to say, actually moving forward, what is your unconscious bias when you go to market to hire someone? What is your unconscious bias when you tell a story about an interaction? Yeah. What is your unconscious bias around what their skill set will be?
Yep, absolutely. Anybody got an experience? No, we've only got 13 minutes left. I want to go to language. We've talked a little bit about language, and my language has been very proper today, which is great because that can sometimes go a bit wild as well. But language is something that we all kind of spoke about in terms of how do we use it. It's so powerful. And so I asked you a question around what's a word that you wish could either be removed from the English language or that people considered in a different way. Kylie, can I go to you first?
Sure. I'm going to cheat and give myself a whole category and talk about the descriptors of female speech. Women are often accused of moaning, bleating, crying, whinging. How about we just say? That's it.
Right. Love it. Okay. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, sure. Okay, for the women in the room in particular, no is a full sentence. It's a complete sentence. It doesn't need an explainer after that. No. If you need to, because you're feeling you need to be polite, that doesn't work for me. And the reason that I say that is because the very next word I want women to stop using or to really reduce, because we don't need to use it, is sorry. I do not need to apologise that I am unavailable or that doesn't work for me, and I do not need to give you a reason why, and yet I am so trained by the way I have been brought up in polite society that I need to do that. Men don't generally do that. My husband certainly doesn't do it. He's just like, no, and I'm okay. Apologise when you actually have something to be sorry for. Being unavailable is not one of those things. Apologising for your presence, for any other thing, most of those things, we need to stop doing it. And one more thing, this is not a word thing. If you have ever been told as a woman that you are too direct, take that as a badge of honour and wear it with pride. Please. I am no longer going to not own that. I'm going into my next decade and going, what's one of your strengths? I am direct. I am direct to the point that you will always know what I am thinking, and you will have very clear, clarity about what direction I'm headed.
I have never not known what you were thinking, Sally. So I 100% agree.
And I'm not sorry about it.
And direct is not a bad thing to be, right? So people know where we stand. We like that in other people. We need to be able to own that. We need to be able to own and step into that. And so, there's a lot of young people that are presenting at this conference and are around. And so please consider how you promote yourself, how you talk about yourself, and how often we hear people in our networks using some of these words. Lisa, I want to go to you. What would you like for people?
I would say in general, I would say, it is so easy, and I've really noticed this coming back into ag. It is so easy to go to the negative all the time on people, right? And we talk about being direct. Why don't you just go directly to the positive? And I think, we actually had a number of team members together last week. We had this really great facilitator, and he said, and I loved it. He said, back to the old school. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. If they're not here to defend themselves, you don't know whether it's true, don't say it. And it was gorgeous. We were afterwards, and I had there was a group of about 50 boys actually there with me, and someone went to say something. And another guy stood up and pulled him up and said, they're not here to defend themselves. We don't talk about like that in Queensland. That's not what Queenslanders do. And that to me, I don't think I've ever been so proud. And so I say to everyone, it's not about the words, it's about the truth, and it's the positivity. And that's tough sometimes because we work in tough industries. Have good friends that you can say the stuff you need to say to. But when you're talking to people and telling stories, particularly about other people you work with, stay in the truth, stay in the positive. And if they're not there to defend themselves, don't tell the story that you don't know anything about.
Well said. Jossie, I haven't forgotten you.
No.
What word are you taking out of the vocab?
Well, it's just. I think too many women just say, I'm just. I like to say when I retired from rural finance that I was just a mum. I thought I was going to the quiet life of the farm. How wrong was I, really? But I think women are juggling so much. Stop saying you're just. You're doing so much more.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just and only. Those two little words got to go.
Yep.
In terms of how we describe ourselves, yeah? I'm conscious of the time, but I also want to make sure we've got a chance for you all to suggest an action. We're heading towards the end of OCAG. We're going to be asked about what's our action and making progress. For us as a panel, what's something you want people to do as a result of the conversations we've had up here today? Jossie, I might start with you if I can.
Yeah, I think it's all about creating the culture around not just women, but young people coming into ag. I think it's super, super important, something I'm very passionate about.
Awesome. Kylie?
I would like to see more women failing up rather than just failing and disappearing. So the next time a woman in your midst fails, and we will, ask yourself, can I give them a second chance? What does a second chance look like? If they were a man, what second chance would be available to them?
Ooh. Yep. Lisa?
I'm going to sit on the unconscious bias. I think I see it a lot. I think and no one's perfect, right? We all do it. Everyone has got an unconscious bias. And, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Blink, and it was a world bestseller because everyone knows they have an unconscious bias. If you haven't read that book, go and buy it and read it. If you have, it's been a while since you've read it, go and read it again. And yeah, in the decisions we make, what is our life experiences? That's what your unconscious bias is. What is our life experiences actually guiding us to make a decision over, or are we sitting there and actually really reflecting and challenging ourselves on that?
Brilliant. We're really rattling through this. Sally Ann, what about for you?
So I've got two things, and it goes back to the conversation that you were having earlier about power. I want every single person in this room right now to just take a moment and reflect, what is your sphere of influence and what is your sphere of control? And let me just quickly unpack that. Sphere of control is the things that you directly control. Now, it might be in your family group, it might be in your friends group, it might be in your place of employment. You might be a manager, you might be a senior executive. It's things that you have absolutely direct control over. So I want you to kind of keep that phrase in mind, sphere of control. Sphere of influence, this is something we don't often take action in. Sphere of influence is, who do you know? Who have you spoken to? Who are you going to speak to? Who are you hanging out with? Where are you spending your time? Where are you spending your money? Where are you spending your resources? What purchasing power do you have? What decisions do you make every single day? And when you think about your sphere of influence and your sphere of control, I want you to ask yourself, what kind of society do I want to build? Do I want one that is deliberately and intentionally inclusive? Do I want to see people around me that are not like me? Do I want to have a community where everybody can fully participate in? Because when you ask yourself that question, the very next thing you need to do is say, what is in my sphere of control to do about it today? And there'll be 100 things. You don't need to be a manager to actually have something that you can implement. Please hear me on that. You do not need to be a manager, a CEO, or a senior executive. Everybody has something within their control that they can do and an action that they can take. And then what can I influence? And this is the big unlock. If as a society, if we did nothing else but recognise what we could influence on a daily basis in this regard, we could actually fundamentally change the communities that we live in, because you don't know the power, you don't know the sphere of control that the person you're talking to has. If they have more power than you and you can influence them to make a decision that benefits the cause that you're trying to champion, in this case if we're talking about women in ag, if it benefits them, if it pushes them to make a decision that unlocks for somebody else, your influence is as powerful, if not more, than their control and their power. So recognise your sphere of influence and recognise your sphere of control, and just bloody do something on a daily basis intentionally about it. Because if you're waiting for the magic wand, it's not coming. I've been waiting for 12 months to see the full implementation of the recommendations of my report. It is the latest in a long line of them. So I don't want to wait for that. I'm choosing to take action. Nobody in this room has any excuse not to do the same.
And we don't have time, right? We need to get on with this. Women are, we talk about it in terms of who are the decision makers, who's in charge of the spend, where the investment is going. It is good business sense to be investing in some of our female founders and in the work that we're doing. You need to think about how you're marketing towards community and what that actually looks like. I really, really want to thank our panel today. If you haven't crossed paths with them before, if you don't follow them on LinkedIn, if you're not aware of the work that they're doing, please reach out. Please find them, follow them, and see the work that they're doing. They are truly leaders across industry, regardless of gender, regardless of job title, and we are very, very grateful for the time that they've spent with us today. Can we please give them a big round of applause?